Hello, YouTube! Today I wanted to show off the updated version of my Terror Amara build, named Twisted Amara. This is built mainly around the Terror weapon damage, fire rate, Terror crit, and of course the action skill and, or ASE, apply Terror annoying. As this is a gun-focused build, we will be focusing around that instead of course, using that chance to apply Terror on melee. There are a couple exceptions to this rule in the build, but overall that will be the main thing used. With that, let's get into the build. I wanted to use a variety of manufacturers in this build, and pair them with the matched company man. Now, if you don't have DLC 6 or the Season Pass 2, that's not a big issue. What I would suggest swapping out for the company man is either a Victory Rush or a Pearl. As far as the Victory Rush goes, I do tend to stick to the Snowdrift, just for utility reasons, moving around the map faster. But a Flesh Melter will also do great work, especially in the takedowns. That would also allow for a little more freedom, swapping around to different guns that are not the same manufacturer, if you prefer, say, like running a Radical and a Monarch or something like that. Now, the other big thing is if you don't have the DLCs, there are a few weapons you wouldn't have, like the Radical. Those are all really easily replaced with some of the main game equivalents in this particular setup. So the Radical you could get rid of for the Hellshock, which is also just gonna slap around the enemies. The Hellshock is still amazing, especially when you add in some terror things to increase the weapon damage and the fire rate. Now, as you may remember at the beginning, I said most of the setup will be the terror, weapon damage, fire rate, and the crit annoying. There are a couple exceptions, and the biggest exception is the free Radical. This gun is just so ridiculously good with kill stack, or killing an enemy grants 13% weapon damage and reload speed for 25 seconds. And of course this does a stack. Already adding weapon damage and fire rate because of terror, adding in the kill stack already being really good on the Radical, the combo is just ridiculous. So I had to keep kill stack on this particular weapon. There are a couple that I do like to have with Cryo that were just a blast using the Terror Cryo. The Unkempt Herald is one of them, and I had a lot of fun on the Flipper with the Cryo damage. So if you do want to try that out and use a little bit of variety in your playstyle with that, I would definitely suggest it. It's just a lot of fun. The other anoint that there was an exception for is the Phase Grass Terror anoint for Terror Skulls, which basically, as the card reads, says after phase grassing an enemy, Amara fires Terror Skulls at the grass target, dealing 61,890 damage. This is a lot of fun, and it adds some interesting ways to play around the game. It's not going to give you the best damage out there, but it is a really fun playstyle to kind of mix things up a little bit. Now, there were a few different anoints that I mentioned. One of them is the on-action skill end, apply terror to yourself every 3 seconds for the next 18 seconds. While terrified, gain increased damage and fire rate. The more terror you have, the higher the bonus. And of course, while terrified, gain increased crit damage. The more terror you have, the higher the bonus. Those are the 3 big ones that we'll be using. Now, I do, for efficiency's sake, like to keep it on the Apply Terror ASE for grenades, the Terrified gain weapon damage and fire rate on the shields, and weapons with the increased crit damage. And that's just so when you're swapping things out, you already know The guns have these, the shields have these, and the grenades have these, and you don't really have to worry about swapping extra things around if you just want to swap out one particular item. So let's go over the grenades. Grenades really are not going to be super picky for this build. It is mainly there for just the annoying. I have a big love of the Hex, and I prefer to run the Hex as often as I can. So I did decide to go ahead and use the Rad Hex here, mainly because that extra radiation damage can help out a lot, and it's always nice to have an extra damage type in your formula. If you do want to, since this is a terror build, use the Ghast Call, what I would suggest doing is, of course with the Ghast Call you don't have an Anoint. As of this video, the Anoint on Ghast Call is not possible. So you would lose the ASE. So what I would suggest doing is instead taking off the weapon damage and fire rate from your shield and using those on your weapons, and then just replacing the shield weapon damage fire rate with the ASE terror on your shields. That way you can still stick to that consistent, knowing if you swap this out for this, you don't have to worry about swapping other things around to keep those annoyance working with each other. And then as far as shields go, I didn't really find a specific preference outside of just that normal use a revolter, use an old god, so on and so forth. Personally, I do like to keep the revolter just because I like to keep my action skill up, as often as possible. So triggering the revolter over and over again gives you even more fire rate, so you just keep having that fire rate just stack over and over and over and over again, and it just gets crazy. So that is my personal preference. But as far as an actual, like, this is the shield you need to use, there isn't a specific one I would really highly suggest. Revolter's going to always get the job done, but that's the same for, any build. It's just a crazy shield right now. If you do want to run the Cryo Terror, the one thing I would say is swap it out for the Frozen Heart with the action skill Start Anoint on it, so that you can get even more cryo going, and you can just start stacking that cryo together. That being said, if you want to do that, I would also suggest switching over to an Icebreaker, so you can do even more damage to anything that gets frozen in that time. Now the last thing I wanted to go over was the Phase Zerker. Any of the class mods that give gun damage are going to be great. The two best, of course, are always going to be the Phase Zerker or the Driver. I do prefer to stick to the Phase Zerker for this specific setup, because it does give more cooldown, which gives more triggering annoyance because of triggering your action skill, and then of course also triggers that Revolter, which even gives even more shock damage and fire rate. So that would be my personal preference. But if you want to go Driver on this, it is also a lot of fun. Speeding around with high fire rate and just speedy running is so much fun. Alright, so let's get into the skill layout. This skill layout is pretty identical to the skill layout I run for my endgame rush Amara. So let's go ahead and start in Red Tree. First we've got Steady Hands, 3 out of 3. We're going to use this for the handling and the accuracy. We have Infusion at 5 out of 5. This is just to convert whatever damage we're dealing with our action skill element into 40% of our gun damage. So you can see I've got Corrosive on, so we would get 40% of the damage we're dealing with our weapon as Corrosive, which is just always nice stacking extra elemental damage there. We've got 5 out of 5 in Tempest, which is going to boost our elemental damage and even more if we're using the shock element. We've got 2 out of 5 in Wildfire, mainly just for getting down tree. At this point, we are using it instead of using 1 in Illuminated Fist, which we're not doing any melee damage. And we're not going to put anything into Anima, because it does have a tendency to get you down as well. and it's just overall not an efficient choice. From there, we do have 1 in Dread, which is there for gun damage for when we are using Grasp. And if you do prefer to use Tie That Bind over Phase Cast, I'm so sorry, I totally blanked on the word there. Over Phase Cast, this is going to just be general gun damage increase overall. Now you can see where the other point in Wildfire comes in. In my testing and runs, I've just found that I would rather have another point in Wildfire than a single point in Catharsis. Catharsis doesn't really feel like it does enough to be worth a point to me. We've got 1 in Deepwell for more mag size, less reloading, more shooting, always great. We've got 3 in Indiscriminate. This is going to be for ricocheting off enemies. 1 in Sustainment. This is one of the most powerful skills Amara's trees has. Just 1 point in Sustainment can keep you up, period. As long as you're dealing damage, you are almost always at full life. It's crazy how much this 4% lifesteal does. We've got 4 out of 5 in Conflux, and that's basically just going to increase our chances of getting that electrocute, fire, or the corrosive damage on enemies so that they're taking more damage over time. And then of course we did cap out Red with Forceful Expression, which is going to give us even more element damage, and that is of course picked on whichever skill element we've procced into. Now on to Green Tree. We've got 3 in Personal Space, just some bonus damage based on how close the enemy is to you. 2 in Clarity. You could go Root to Rise if you really want to. I just find Clarity is a little bit better with some more health regeneration. 5 out of 5 in Arms Deal for that extra splash damage. Especially with the Radical, this is going to be great. Having those rockets give extra splash damage on top of its already crazy damage is just a great overall pick. Purple Tree, we only get 1 thing, which is Heavy Rain, 5 out of 5. That is going to just be for the splash damage and the projectile speed, which is just overall a nice utility to have. And finishing off our skill tree with our Phase Cast Blue Tree, we are using Tandava and Soul Sap, again for more lifesteal, more healing. So we've got 4 out of 5 in Do Harm, which is going to increase our action skill damage and the amount of rush attacks that we can have. 3 out of 3 in Fast Hands, reloading faster, swapping between weapons faster, and of course since we are using some Malawans, switching that mode in between so you can get different elements on your weapons is really nice to be able to do that a little bit faster. 1 out of 5 in Violent Tapestry, which is basically just going to give us a little bit more chance for those status effects. 2 out of 5 in Alacrity, which is going to give us a little bit more reload speed with the more rush stacks we have, of course combining with more stacks that you can have with Do Harm. This starts to add up pretty fast and is really nice how fast you can get your reload speed with just 2 points. We've got 3 out of 3 for Transcend, which is going to increase our accuracy and the critical hit damage that we do after using our action skill, which we're popping off quite frequently, so you'll have this most of the time. We've got 5 out of 5 with Restless, just to get that cooldown down, so that we can take advantage of things like Transcend, like shooting off our Revolter, just have that action skill up more often to proc more things. 3 out of 3 for From Rest, which is going to increase our fire rate and charge time, decrease our charge time, so increase our charge speed, and that is basically just going to stack up even more with how we've built this up. We've got 3 out of 3 in Laid Bare. Enemies take increased damage from all sources for a few seconds after being damaged by Amara's action skill. Just a great damage increase when you're already using your action skill quite a bit. We've got 3 out of 3 in Wrath, increased gain from gun damage. And this is basically just going to be every time we activate our action skill. So again, back to that cooldown, action skill procs more things, 1 out of 3 in Remnant, and of course just 1 point in Remnant just slaughters things. Remnant is just an absolutely amazing ability, and just 1 point here is great. And our last skill point goes into Avatar, which is going to let us activate our skill twice, which, as I've said over and over, is a big thing with this build because you want to activate your skill as often as you can. Alright guys, with that I do want to go ahead and get into some gameplay so you can see what this looks like and what you can expect out of it. Alright guys, that was the first half of Maliwan Takedown. Next thing I did want to do is I do have people ask about what my setups are as far as skins go. So I just wanted to run back to Sanctuary real quick and I'll show you what I did to get this particular look. Alright, so body is just the base Amara. The head we are using Pucker Up. For the skin we are just using Neon Dreams. And for colors, we've got the reddish orange here with black. We've got the neon green with black, and of course the neon green with black. And that gives you that kind of old school glow-in-the-dark 90s skate night kind of look. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the build as much as I've enjoyed making it. Without further ado, I've been your local sassy SwinLaw. Stay classy, Pandora.